Welcome back to Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and with me today is our special guest, Jenny Cote.
Hello.
Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you
Okay.
did.
Jenny is a celebrated author of children's early American historical fiction books, and not only for children but adults alike, and I'm going to show you how thick this is because I'm working on it myself. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me, Joy.
So, listeners, you may be wondering why I have a children's historical fiction writer here on the podcast, but she believes, and we believe, that education is a national security issue, and we will dig further into that on the podcast. But first, let me ask you to visit our website at www.ascf.us, sign up for our newsletter, consider becoming a member of the ASCF. It's $100 a year, which is less than $10 a month, and it includes a paid subscription to Substack and our bi-weekly newsletter. So Jenny, could you tell us, or tell our listeners, more about yourself and how you came to write on early American historical fiction?
Okay, well, I did not have any clue that I was going to be an author when I grew up. My background is just marketing and strategic planning. I have 2 degrees in that, and I was working at the Children's Hospital. And I was like, this isn't it. This isn't what I'm meant to do. I grew up in the heartbed of history in Yorktown, Williamsburg, Virginia area. Grew up in Norfolk. So my love for our founding history was ingrained in me early. And my parents, we moved down to Georgia the middle of my 10th grade year, and I just had this longing to be back to my historical roots. But a little dog and cat came to live with me, Max and Liz, a Scottish Terrier and a black cat, and they inspired this book series of these talking animals that saved the day on the way to Noah's Ark. And they work behind the scenes, and the humans are clueless, but I look for those moments in history where we don't know how or why something happened, and I slide them in, and they're the ones that make that event happen. So I don't alter the history at all. Well, this team of animals, God chooses them to work behind the scenes in human history. The first 6 are biblical, up through Noah, Joseph, the Christmas story, Life of Christ, Acts to the fall of Rome, and now we're on a 6-book set on the American Revolution. And then I'll actually do C.S. Lewis in World War II.
Oh, wow.
My other passionate era of history. So I'm passionate about God, history, and young people, and writing these books kind of put all those together to do that. And I set out just to write Patrick Henry's biography in story, but as you can see, Jenny's pen got out of control, and now I'm writing the entire war and the entire process.
Well, I said early American history, but apparently we're moving forward onto
We
that.
are moving, we're going to cover it all, the kitchen sink, right?
All right.
And I feel like that's my contribution to my nation, in capturing her history in exhaustive detail.
Well, thank you very much for what you're doing.
Oh,
It's very interesting. And I just want to point out on the cover of the Declaration, The Sword and the Spy, it says, there's a quote by Van Hipp, who is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Army, and it states, education is a national security issue. Jenny makes America's founding history fun reading, ensuring that freedom will once again be passed on to America's youth. And I couldn't agree more. So how did you get to meet Van Hipp?
Well, I do a lot of research, and I go to historical revolutionary sites, and I had not yet been to Cowpens, South Carolina, and it was the annual commemoration of the Battle of Cowpens, and so I went up there to see my friend Mark Schneider, who portrays Bannister Tarleton, my villain in my books, and I was like, oh, I haven't been to Cowpens yet, so I went, and there was a dinner there with several of the dignitaries with Wofford College that Van Hipp is an alum of, who supports, and he brings in speakers and does these forums on that Cowpens weekend. And so it was my privilege to meet him and sit with him at dinner, and he went home with my books. And because we talked a lot about these things, about educating our youth being a national security issue, and he sees the value of educating our children early. And so he was kind enough to endorse the book, and he has actually had me back to Wofford to sign books for some of his annual events. So he's been quite a gentleman, and it was an honor to meet him.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And I heard your talk on Fox and Friends, and I heard you talking about, I think it was the statues.
Right.
So, I thought this definitely, she gets it. This is definitely a national security issue as far as education is concerned. So what are your thoughts as far as, I guess, moving on from tearing down the statues and renaming institutions? Are we erasing history that should not be erased?
History can't be erased. And that's what is so absurd, that people think you can't, oh, well, if we just, scratch it out or burn this book or tear down that statue, it never happened. And that's kind of, it's illogical to even think that. But the interesting thing, The Voice, the Revolution, and the Key, my first revolution book, which focuses on Patrick Henry and the founding fathers as kids, and it goes through Liberty or Death, March 23rd, 1775. It released the week of Charlottesville. And I had my publicist was trying to get me on Fox and Friends, and I wrote an op-ed about the Charlottesville, and then Fox, was gracious to have me on, and I talked with John Scott about this, and he asked me that question. He says, should we tear down our statues? And I'm like, no. We need to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've got to show the good, so we repeat that. You've got to show the bad and the ugly, so we don't repeat that.
Yes, exactly.
And certainly, if a statue was put up with the intent to intimidate, to slam, to disrespect, well, don't destroy it. Take it, put it in a museum, and put a big sign. This is what you don't do. Use it as a teachable thing. No, we don't want statues of Hitler, lauding him and stuff. But I want a statue of him in a museum to show, look what he did. Look at all the documentaries that are on him. People want to know this history because, it's a cliche, but it is so true. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. And so I write the good, the bad, and the ugly. And yeah, it's uncomfortable sometimes to do
You're right.
that.
It's interesting how he rose to power. So I do think we have to, we don't necessarily want his big statue up there, but understand why.
Why. Exactly, the why behind this. And that's the purpose of statues and museums, is the why. Not just the what, but the why. And you have to know all of it, and museums should be the forum where these objectionable things are placed, and not erasing them. And why are we so afraid of history? What is there to be afraid of other than not knowing it? What we should be afraid of is forgetting it. That's where the fear comes in. That's where the national security issue comes in,
And when you bring up museums, I was thinking I had the chance to go to Harry Truman's museum and just the kind of read all about the struggle of whether to drop the bomb or not. And that's just learning from history. I mean, the why.
And at the end of the day, you remember, he was a human. All of our founding fathers were human. They were very flawed. And, we tend to put them up on pedestals, if I may, And in my books, I try to bring them, not bring them down from the pedestal, but show how real they were and how flawed they were. And, it's very easy to be an armchair historian quarterback and slam our founding fathers and so forth. And it's like, despite their flaws, look at what they did. Look at this miracle that they pulled off. And the American people, the miracle that we pulled off as a nation to gain our independence and give the world the best chance for liberty and freedom that it's ever had in this model. It was broken to begin with, you can say that, but it's like, the Liberty Bell cracked on its first ringing. But did they trash and throw away the Liberty Bell?
No.
They kept what do you call it when they remold it? And
Yes, yeah, I've been there.
They didn't throw it away. They kept recasting it, okay? But they didn't throw it away. And I love to use the analogy of a statue, and I do so in The Voice, the Revolution, and the Key. One of my characters, Liz, is upset about the slavery issue, and here the Declaration of Independence.
Voice, the Revolution.
And so the team leader, Gilliman, explains that when a sculptor sculpts a statue, let's just take the Statue of Liberty, for instance, and you start with what? A big block of granite marble. Does the sculptor hit with one blow and the statue's done perfectly? No. it takes careful chisels to slowly do it right and do it beautifully. And it's, you could say it's painful for the marble or the statue if you want to, anthropomorphize it. But it takes time and diligence and careful precision to get it right, to bring the beautiful image that's out. And that's one reason I love Lady Liberty from that analogy. And it's a great way to teach kids that it's going to take a while to get this statue perfected and beautiful. And it's always going to be up to the next generation to do their part for America's story.
Yes, so thank you for writing these books.
My honor to do so.
And the Statue of Liberty was given to us by the French, and I'm going to get into that in just a moment here. But from another international standpoint, as far as understanding history, we talk a lot about Israel, obviously, and the war going on. Right. And I look at the people that do the pro-Palestinian protests, and I just wonder if they really know the history of how Israel started and why.
Right, and the fact that, Israel has been around, it's documented. It's not that it just came around in, 1948. You can see the history of it. And also, Palestine, it was Emperor Hadrian, in the first century. He's the one that gave the name Palestine, because he was like, I'm sick of dealing with these Jews. Who's their worst enemy? Well, the Philistines. Yes. Well, okay, what's that word in Latin? Palestina. And so he named that area Palestine to insult the Jews and to try to erase their history. But you're not going to do that with God's chosen nation. You're not. And so the world would do well to study the history of both Israel and Palestine, know where this came from, and what, from the river to the sea, that kids are chanting and people are chanting. Okay, well, pull up a map. What river? And you ask what river? Oh, no. Well, they're talking about the Jordan. And what's the sea? Well, the Mediterranean. Okay, and what's in the middle there? Israel. And so what does that chant mean? It means to wipe them off the map. And so know what you're saying. It's easy to get caught up in the fervor and, join in something, but what you don't know what you're talking about or chanting, it's easy to get carried away in that mob mentality. But when you know the history and what's really happening, it changes everything. And so what is happening, today is it's just there's grief all over it, and a lot of it is ignorance of history. So that is definitely a security issue. It
is, and I find amazing too is that, like you just said, so river to the sea, they don't want Israel there. Hamas has made that clear as well. Right. But in 1965, if I'm getting that correct, dates were not my best part of history lesson, but Israel had their war. They took Gaza Strip, they took the Golan Heights, they took the whole area in there, but they gave back Gaza to have peace in the land. And yet there's this outcry. So yes, I do agree, you need to know our history.
Right, well, and every time, look up the history, every time that Palestinian people have been offered a peace or an arrangement, they've declined because their terms are zero Israel, zero Jews. So they haven't.
Not going to come to much
of an offer
of agreement.
No, that's not going to happen.
Not to get much of agreement there. Yeah, yes. Right. So, and we strongly support the American History Live program that teaches the kids about history.
Right. Yep. Right.
And finally, so I do want to get back to the Statue of Liberty in France and bring up our alliances, because we talk a lot about that here. So particularly the role of the French during the American Revolution and the role of Lafayette. And I heard Jenny talk, and I know she likes Lafayette, and is it a friend of Lafayette's group?
The American Friends of Lafayette.
The American Friends of Lafayette
is a fabulous group that I'm a member of, and we've been around since the early 1900s to preserve the memory of America's first friend, or America's favorite fighting Frenchman, the Marquis de Lafayette, and his story is so spectacular, and he is the star in the Marquis, the Escape, and the Fox, and he's actually been in all of these, but his story is amazing. France was America's first friend, and Lafayette, he was the richest orphan in France, and as a teenager, 17, he heard about this amazing thing that these rebels these people in America that wanted to fight for their freedom, and he heard about it at a dinner in Metz with his regiment. And at this dinner, he pulled a sword and he says, "I will give my heart and sword to fight for America." And they said, "Sit down, Monsieur le Marquis, you're not going anywhere." And England and France were not at war at that moment in history, and they said, "You're not going to go start another war by being, a very visible person." And so they forbid him to go. The king forbid him to go. Did that stop Lafayette? No, of course not. And so he had to escape out under the king's nose and his father-in-law's nose. And he sailed to America at his own expense, bought a ship, came over with Baron de Kalb, and landed here, went to Philadelphia, and he says, "I am here to fight for you." And they said, "Sorry, we don't need you." He says, "I will fight for free." And with those immortal words, as my friend likes to say, they said, "You're hired." And so he, and Washington is like, "What am I going to do with this Frenchman?" Because a lot of French soldiers were showing up, and really they were not helpful. And Lafayette said, "I am not here to teach, I'm here to learn." And so he ended up becoming George Washington's adopted son. And at the first Battle of Brandywine, he was injured, and Washington had his personal physician. He says, "Treat him like my son." And so they formed quite an amazing friendship. And so Lafayette was there through Valley Forge and all of that, but then he went back to France to give his report to the king and the French government. It's like, we really need to support the Americans with, men and supplies and so forth. Of course, French aid had begun long before Lafayette did that, but he came back. France pulled through for us, and without the French Navy and without the French alliance, we would not be independent. So we owe our independence to France. And so the Marquis, he's kind of like, and they called him a statue in search of a pedestal. And so that's what they always called him. And he was out. He was a young teenager out for personal glory that had been in his family line, but he was passionate about freedom and liberty. And he was an abolitionist, and he wanted, slavery to end. He had lots of heart-to-heart talks with Washington and Jefferson about that. Then he. After the war, he went back and got caught up in the French Revolution, actually was in prison for a while. But here's the neat thing. He was invited back to America by President Monroe in 1824, and he ended up spending 13 months going to 24 states. And that's why, as he toured around, and it was to celebrate, this commemorative event, our independence, and as Lafayette went from town to town, state to state. You know how towns are called? Fayetteville, North Carolina, Lafayette, LaGrange. They're all named because of that tour in 1824-25. So this year, 24-25, we're kicking off the bicentennial of Lafayette's Grand Tour, and every state is going to be reenacting these events, beginning in New York City, mid-August, and it's going to be really exciting. So please check out the American Friends of Lafayette website. So, but Lafayette and France, yes, it's such a wonderful story. And then the beauty, they were our first friends, then we repaid the favor in World War I and World War II. And of course, the famous line that the soldiers of World War I went to his grave in Picpus Cemetery in Paris, and they said, "Lafayette, we are here." So it's a beautiful story.
And very interesting, very intrigued when you were talking about Lafayette. I wanted to do some back digging to see how he became so interested in fighting for America. So thank you for sharing all that. Yes.
Oh, I could talk about him all day.
Well, let's talk about your books too.
Okay.
So you said with the Bible stories,
right?
From Noah on, down to Rome, and then we got into
the Revolution, and this is the latest.
The Revolution, and the Key.
That's the first in the series, right? And it starts with the founders as kids, featuring Patrick Henry, but all of them. All the causes leading up to Revolution, including George Washington accidentally setting off that French and Indian War, which became a world war. So ends with Liberty or Death, 3 weeks before Lexington and Concord. And then the Declaration, the Sword and the Spy picks up from there, and that covers Lexington and Concord through the Declaration of Independence. And then the next one, the Marquis, the Escape, and the Fox, picks up backtracks a little bit to April 76 to April 77, including Belle in New York, Trenton, Princeton, and Lafayette leaving and escaping France to come over. So they're great fun reads, and I have a personal library of 400 books on the American Revolution. All of that content, if you don't want to read all of those, just read these. You're going to get it. And one of the most important things in the back of my books, you can see my bibliography of sources, is I have a word from the author, and this is one of the most important things, and that's where I say, this was real, this was fake, this is where we're not sure what happened in this case, this is what I ran with, because my genre is historical fiction fantasy in that order. And so I start with the rock bed of the history and then build the other layers. And I always tell, and I have critiquers and historical experts, please review, make sure I've got this right. And I'm the first one that wants to know if I've gotten something wrong. I don't want to be that author that missed something. Because guess what happens? If I make a mistake in writing the history 200 years from now, people are going to think, oh, that really happened. Like, the British are coming, like Paul Revere said, and that's not what he said. Because everybody was British. Everybody would have been coming.
Very good
He
point.
said the regulars are out. So details like that are important.
That is very, and you definitely got your history pretty down pat, I would say. So you can check also out our other episode or our other podcasts on AmericanHistoryLive.org. But thank you for joining us on the American Security Council Foundation, because definitely this is a national security issue as far as education is concerned, as well as our alliances.
And it's not just education for children. Don't put history just on them. Every American needs to know this founding history. So explore as a family. You know, if you're single or, you know, a grandparent or what, I don't care what age you are, learn your history however you can.
And where can we find your books?
Signed from my website, epicordoroftheseven.com, or you can get them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you find books, all over the world. And they're also on Audible as audiobooks.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Jenny. Yeah. And to our listeners, please share your comments on today's podcast as far as education and a matter of national security and our alliances. You can find us on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Our website is www.ascf.us. Consider joining ASCF as a member and get our newsletter. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thank you. It was an honor.
It's an honor to have you on here. Thank you for taking your time out.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, join us again next time as we bring you Peace Through Strength podcast.